The auctioneer's voice cut through the scorching Texas heat like a knife through butter. And Flora Zimmerman stood on that wooden platform in Shafter with her hands bound, and her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst right through her chest. September 1878 had brought nothing but misery to her doorstep, starting with her father's death from fever, and ending with her uncle dragging her to this dusty town square to sell her off like cattle to pay his gambling debts. The crowd of rough men below leered up at her, their eyes hungry and cruel, and she forced herself to look past them to the distant mountains, trying to remember what freedom had felt like before everything fell apart. Her uncle Silas stood off to the side counting money he had already borrowed against her sale, his face red from whiskey and greed. Flora was 20 years old and had never imagined her life would come to this moment. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father had worked himself to the bone on their small ranch trying to provide for her. When the fever took him 3 months ago, Silas had shown up with legal papers claiming he was her guardian now. She had tried to run, but where could a woman go alone in this territory without money or protection? The auctioneer was listing her qualities like she was a horse. Healthy, strong, can cook and clean, young enough to bear many children. Flora felt bile rise in her throat. The bidding started, and she closed her eyes against the tears that threatened to fall. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her cry. $500. A voice rang out clear and strong from the back of the crowd. The auctioneer stuttered. That was more than triple the opening bid. Flora opened her eyes and searched for the speaker. The crowd parted slightly, and she saw him. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown hat and a leather vest over a worn shirt, he stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set. Even from a distance, she could see his eyes were a startling shade of blue-green, like the river near her childhood home. 500 going once, the auctioneer said eagerly, scanning the crowd for counter bids. The other men grumbled, but none spoke up. That kind of money was a fortune. Going twice. Flora's heart was in her throat. She did not know if this stranger would be better or worse than the others, but something in his steady gaze made her pulse quicken for an entirely different reason. Sold to the gentleman in the back. The cowboy pushed through the crowd and climbed the platform steps. Up close, he was younger than she had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He handed the auctioneer a stack of bills without taking his eyes off Flora. "Keys to the shackles," he said, his voice low and commanding. The auctioneer fumbled with a key ring and handed it over. The cowboy stepped forward, and Flora instinctively took a step back. He paused, something flickering across his face, then held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Let me get those off you," he said quietly. She extended her wrists, and his fingers were surprisingly gentle as he unlocked the iron cuffs. They fell away with a clatter, and she rubbed at the raw skin underneath. Before she could process what was happening, he was unlocking the shackles around her ankles too. "What is your name?" he asked. Flora Zimmerman." "Flora." He said it like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. "My name is James Harrison. Most people call me James." Her uncle Silas pushed his way onto the platform, his hand outstretched. "Pleasure doing business with you, mister. She will give you no trouble, I promise." I raised her right. James turned to look at Silas, and Flora saw something dangerous flash in those blue-green eyes. "You did not raise her at all, from what I heard. You sold your own blood to settle your debts." Silas's face turned purple. "Now you listen here. No, you listen." James's voice dropped even lower, and several people in the crowd leaned in to hear. "You take that money and you leave this town. If I ever see you near Flora again, I will personally make sure you regret it. Are we clear?" Silas sputtered but grabbed his money and scrambled off the platform, disappearing into the crowd. Flora stared at James, completely bewildered. The auctioneer was trying to hand him papers, some kind of bill of sale that would legally transfer ownership of her, but James waved them away. "Burn them," he said. "But sir, you need proof of purchase." "I said burn them." James turned to Flora and his expression softened. "Come on, let us get out of here." He offered his hand to help her down the platform steps. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was calloused and warm, and he held her hand carefully as she navigated the stairs in her thin dress and worn shoes. The crowd was dispersing now that the spectacle was over, muttering about foolish cowboys with too much money. James led her to a beautiful chestnut horse tied up at the hitching post. The animal nickered softly and nuzzled his shoulder. "This is Copper," James said. "He is gentle. Have you ridden before?" "Yes, but not in a long time. Not since her father's horse had to be sold." "We do not have far to go." He untied Copper and easily swung himself into the saddle, then reached down for her. "Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up." Flora did as instructed, and a moment later she was seated in front of him on the horse. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and she was acutely aware of his solid warmth at her back. They rode through Shafter's dusty streets in silence, past the saloon and the general store and the church with its white-painted steeple. People watched them pass with curious eyes. James guided Copper to a small building at the edge of town. A sign out front read Sheriff's Office. Flora's stomach clenched. Was this some kind of trick? Was he turning her in for something? "Easy," James said, as if sensing her panic. "I just need to take care of something official. It will only take a minute." He dismounted and helped her down, then tied Copper's reins to the post. The sheriff's office was dim and cool compared to the blazing sun outside. A gray-haired man with a star pinned to his vest looked up from his desk. "James Harrison," the sheriff said with a slight smile. "Should have known you would be involved in that mess in the square." "Sheriff Davis," James tipped his hat. "I need you to witness something." He turned to Flora. "Flora Zimmerman, as of this moment you are a free woman. No one owns you. No one has any legal claim to you. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. I want the sheriff here to document this so there is no question." Flora could not breathe. She stared at him, searching his face for the lie, the trap, the cruelty that surely had to be hiding somewhere. But all she saw was sincerity. "I do not understand," she whispered. "You spent $500. Best money I ever spent if it means you are free." He looked at Sheriff Davis. "Can you write up something official? I want it on record that I purchased her contract from that auction, only to immediately nullify it and declare her a free citizen with no obligations to anyone." Sheriff Davis was already pulling out paper and ink. "You are a good man, James. This town could use more like you." He scratched out a document in careful handwriting, signed it, and had James sign as a witness. Then he handed it to Flora. "You keep this safe, Miss Zimmerman. Anyone gives you trouble, you show them this paper." Flora took the document with shaking hands. The words blurred as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she managed to choke out. "I do not know how to thank you." James looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You do not need to thank me. What your uncle did was wrong. What that whole auction was wrong." He shifted his weight. "Do you have anywhere to go, family besides Silas?" She shook her head. "No one. My father's ranch was sold to pay his debts before I could stop it. I have nothing." "You have your freedom," James said firmly. "That is everything." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I have a proposition for you if you are willing to hear it." Flora wiped her eyes. "What kind of proposition?" "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside town. It is not much, just me and my ranch hand Carlos. We run cattle and break horses." I could use help with the cooking and the household tasks. I would pay you fair wages, provide room and board, and you would be free to leave whenever you wanted. No strings, no obligations beyond an honest day's work. It sounded too good to be true, which made Flora wary. Why would you do this? You do not know me. Because everybody deserves a chance to build their own life. His eyes met hers steadily. I am not asking you to decide right now. Sheriff Davis, is there a boarding house in town where Miss Zimmerman could stay while she considers her options? My wife and I have a spare room, the sheriff offered. You are welcome to stay with us for a few days, miss. No charge. Flora looked between the two men. Every instinct told her to be suspicious, to guard herself, but she was exhausted from fighting and running and being afraid. I would like to see the ranch, she heard herself say, if the offer is genuine. It is. James looked relieved. We can ride out there now if you are up for it. I am up for it. They left the sheriff's office and rode out of Shafter heading west. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. Flora had been born in Texas and knew its moods, its dust storms and flash floods, its scorching summers and surprisingly cold winters. As they rode, James talked about his ranch in an easy, comfortable way that helped settle her nerves. I bought the land 3 years ago, he said. Saved up working cattle drives and odd jobs since I was 16. The house is not fancy, but it is solid. Got a good well, a barn, and enough grazing land for about 200 head of cattle right now. I am building it up slow and steady. Where are you from originally? Flora asked. Louisiana. My parents died when I was young, yellow fever. I drifted west working ranches and learning the trade. His voice was matter of fact, but she heard the old pain underneath. What about you? I grew up about 30 miles from Shafter. My father had a small ranch. We raised cattle too, and my mother kept chickens and a garden. The memories hurt, but they were precious too. My parents taught me to read and write. They wanted me to have an education even though we did not have much money. Reading and writing are important, James agreed. I taught myself on cattle drives. One of the older cowboys had a beat-up copy of Shakespeare plays. I must have read them a dozen times. This surprised her. You read Shakespeare? Is that so hard to believe? There was amusement in his voice. No, She trailed off. Most of the men I have known do not care much for books. Most of the men you have known sound boring. Flora found herself smiling despite everything. They rode in companionable silence for a while longer until James pointed ahead. There it is. The ranch house came into view, a sturdy wooden structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It was simple but well maintained, with shutters on the windows and a vegetable garden out front that was struggling in the heat. The barn was bigger than the house, red painted and solid. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and a corral with several horses. A man emerged from the barn as they rode up. He was older than James, maybe 40, with weathered brown skin and kind eyes. "Boss, you are back early," he called out. Then he saw Flora and his eyebrows rose. James dismounted and helped Flora down. "Carlos, this is Miss Flora Zimmerman. She is going to be helping around the ranch. Flora, this is Carlos Mendoza. He has been working here since I bought the place, and I trust him with my life." Carlos tipped his hat to Flora. "Welcome, miss. We do not get many visitors out here." "Thank you," Flora said quietly. "Let me show you the house," James said. He led her up the porch steps and opened the front door. The interior was neat but obviously lacked a woman's touch. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a fireplace, a rough-hewn table with chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. 2 doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms. "You would have that room," James said, pointing to the door on the right. "It is the bigger of the two and gets good morning light. I will bunk with Carlos out in the barn." "You do not have to do that," Flora protested. "This is your house, and you are a guest who deserves privacy and safety." His tone left no room for argument. "Come on, I will show you." The bedroom was indeed spacious, with a real bed frame and mattress, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the garden. It was more than Flora had dared hope for. "I know it is not much," James said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "But you can fix it up however you like, and like I said, you are free to leave any time. I can take you back to town whenever you want, or help you get to another city if you prefer." Flora turned to face him. In the soft light filtering through the window, she could see the dust on his clothes from riding, the concern in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders as he waited for her answer. This man had paid $500 just to set her free. He had brought her to his home and offered her honest work and safety. She did not understand it, but she wanted to. "I will stay," she said. "At least for a while, if that is all right." The relief on his face was unmistakable. "That is more than all right. Let me get you some water so you can wash up. We usually eat dinner around sunset. Nothing fancy, but Carlos makes a mean pot of beans." He left her alone in the room, and Flora sat down on the edge of the bed. It was soft, real feathers in the mattress. She looked down at the document Sheriff Davis had given her, the proof of her freedom, and carefully folded it before tucking it into her dress pocket. Then she let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since her father had died. But these tears were different. They were grief and relief and hope all tangled together. That evening, Flora joined James and Carlos for dinner on the porch. Carlos had indeed made beans, along with cornbread and strong coffee. The food was simple but delicious, and Flora realized she had not eaten all day. "This is wonderful," she said. "Thank you." "You are very welcome, miss," Carlos said. "It will be nice to have someone else appreciate my cooking. James here just shovels it down without tasting it." "That is not true," James protested. "I taste it. You eat like a starving dog." Flora laughed, surprising herself. The two men grinned at her, pleased to have lifted her spirits. As the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Carlos told stories about his childhood in Mexico, and James chimed in with tales from various cattle drives. Flora found herself relaxing, the knots of fear in her chest slowly loosening. Over the next few weeks, Flora settled into life at the ranch. She woke early to make breakfast, cleaned the house, tended the garden, and prepared meals. James had been true to his word about the wages. Every Saturday, he gave her coins that she saved in a jar in her room. He and Carlos were respectful and kind, never making her feel uncomfortable or afraid. But more than that, Flora found herself genuinely enjoying their company. James would come in from working with the cattle dusty and exhausted, but he always had a smile for her and asked about her day. Carlos taught her Spanish words and how to make proper tortillas. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. Flora began to notice things about James. The way he was always gentle with the animals, even when breaking the wild horses. How he paid Carlos fairly and treated him as an equal partner. The way his whole face lit up when he laughed. The careful way he spoke to her, like she was made of something precious that might break. One afternoon in late October, Flora was hanging laundry on the line when she heard shouting from the corral. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran toward the sound. James was in the ring with a huge black stallion that was rearing and bucking violently. Carlos stood outside the fence looking worried. "He needs to stop," Carlos called out. "That horse is too wild today." But James was focused entirely on the animal, speaking in low, calm tones as he slowly approached. The stallion's eyes rolled white with fear. Flora held her breath as James reached out one hand, still talking softly. The horse snorted and pawed the ground but did not bolt. Inch by inch, James got closer until his hand touched the stallion's neck. The horse shuddered but held still. James stroked its neck, continuing his quiet words. Gradually, impossibly, the stallion began to calm. After what felt like an eternity, James was able to put a lead rope on the animal and walk it around the corral. The tension drained from the air. "That was incredible," Flora breathed. Carlos shook his head in admiration. "He has a gift with horses. They trust him." That night, Flora found James sitting on the porch steps looking up at the stars. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat down beside him. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup. "You were amazing today with that horse," Flora said. "I have never seen anything like it." Animals just need patience and understanding. They are not so different from people that way. He took a sip of coffee. "I learned from an old cowboy when I was younger. He said that fear makes creatures mean, but kindness can gentle the wildest heart." Flora thought about that. "Is that why you bought me at that auction?" James was quiet for a long moment. "I was in town to sell some cattle when I heard about the auction. I could not believe it was actually happening. When I saw you standing up there, so afraid but trying so hard to be brave, I knew I had to do something. I could not let those other men buy you, the things they were saying." His jaw clenched. "No human being should be treated that way. You are a good man, James Harrison." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Flora felt something shift in the air between them. "You make me want to be," he said quietly, her heart skipped. Over the weeks at the ranch, she had tried not to let herself feel anything beyond gratitude for James. She had told herself it was too soon, too complicated, that she needed to focus on building her own independence. But sitting beside him under the vast Texas sky, she could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest when he was near. "I should go to bed," she said, standing quickly. "Good night." "Good night, Flora." She could feel his eyes on her as she went inside, and she lay awake for a long time that night thinking about blue-green eyes and gentle hands, and the way her name sounded in his voice. November brought cooler weather and preparations for winter. James rode into Shafter to buy supplies, and Flora asked if she could go with him. She needed fabric to make new curtains for the house and wanted to use her saved wages to contribute. "You do not need to spend your money on the house," James protested as they rode copper into town. "I want to. It is my home too for now." Something flickered across his face at those words. "For now," he repeated softly. In town, they visited the general store where Flora picked out blue fabric with white flowers. James bought flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Chen, was friendly and curious about Flora. "It is so nice that James has someone to help him at the ranch," Mrs. Chen said. "He works too hard out there all alone." "Carlos is there too," Flora pointed out. "Yes, but it is not the same as having a woman around." "A house needs a woman to make it a home." Flora felt her cheeks heat, but she did not correct Mrs. Chen's assumptions about her relationship with James. Let the town think what it wanted. As they were loading supplies onto copper, a familiar and unwelcome voice called out, "Well, well. If it is not my niece." Flora froze. Silas was standing outside the saloon, swaying slightly. He had clearly been drinking. James stepped in front of Flora immediately. "I told you to stay away from her." "She is my kin," Silas slurred. "Got a right to talk to her." "You sold that right when you put her on an auction block." James's voice was steel. "Leave now." "Or what, Cowboy? You going to shoot me?" Silas laughed nastily. "I heard you are playing house together. Bet she is earning her keep on her back like a good." James moved so fast Flora barely saw it. One moment Silas was standing. The next he was on the ground with James's fist in his shirt and James's face inches from his. "Say another word and I will break your jaw," James said, his voice deadly quiet. "Flora is under my protection. You insult her again and you will regret it. Now get out of my sight." He released Silas and stepped back. Silas scrambled to his feet, fear sobering him up quickly. He scurried away without another word. Flora was shaking. "Are you all right?" James asked, his anger immediately transforming to concern. "I am fine. Thank you for defending me. Always." He said it like a vow. "Let us go home." They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Flora kept thinking about how James had called it home and how right that had felt. When they arrived, James helped her down from Copper and their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary. "Flora," he began, then stopped. "Never mind. I should get these supplies inside." That night Flora could not sleep. She kept thinking about James, about the way he had defended her, about the careful way he treated her, about how safe and valued she felt for the first time in months. She got up and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, intending to get some water from the kitchen. But when she stepped out of her room, she nearly collided with James, who was apparently having the same idea. "Sorry," they both said at once, then laughed quietly. "Could not sleep?" James asked. "No, too much on my mind, me too." He hesitated. "Want to sit on the porch for a bit." They ended up sitting on the porch steps again, watching the stars. The night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "Can I ask you something?" Flora said after a while. "Anything. Why have you never married? You have a good ranch, you are kind, you are." She trailed off, not quite able to say what she was thinking. "I am what?" He sounded amused. "You are someone who would make a good husband," she finished, her cheeks burning. James was quiet for a moment. "I guess I never found the right person. I was focused on building the ranch, and I did not want to ask a woman to share a hard life out here unless I knew it was real. Unless I knew she wanted to be here as much as I did." He glanced at her. "What about you? Did you ever think about marriage before everything happened?" "Sometimes. My father wanted me to marry for love, not obligation. He said I should wait until I found someone who respected my mind as much as my housekeeping." She smiled at the memory. "He had high standards." "He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was." Flora's throat tightened. "I miss him every day." James reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had really touched her since that day at the auction, and the contact sent electricity through her whole body. "I am sorry you lost him, but I think he would be proud of how strong you have been." Flora looked at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused, hers smaller and rough from work. "James, why did you really buy me at that auction? The truth." He took a deep breath. "The truth is that, when I saw you standing there trying so hard to be brave, something in me recognized something in you. I saw someone who had been hurt by the world but had not let it break her spirit. I saw someone worth saving. And then when I talked to you, I realized you were not just worth saving. You were extraordinary." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know you probably do not want to hear this so soon after everything you have been through, but I need to be honest. I care about you, Flora, more than I should, maybe. And if you want to leave, I will take you anywhere you want to go. But if there is any part of you that might want to stay, not as my employee but as something more, I would be the happiest man in Texas." Flora's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She thought about the past 2 months, about how James had given her freedom and safety and respect, about how he made her laugh and challenged her mind with discussions about books and philosophy, about how her breath caught every time he smiled at her. "I do not want to leave," she whispered. "I have not wanted to leave for weeks now. I was just afraid to admit it because everything is so new and confusing. It does not have to be confusing." James shifted to face her fully. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any big decisions. I am just asking if I can court you properly. Take things slow, let you set the pace. Get to know each other without the shadow of that auction hanging over us. You want to court me?" Flora felt like she might cry again, but this time from happiness. "Very much so, if you will let me." She thought about saying something eloquent, but in the end, she just said, "Yes." James's smile was brighter than the stars. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles gently, like she was a fine lady instead of someone who had been sold at auction. "Thank you," he said. They sat together on the porch until dawn started to pink the horizon, talking about everything and nothing, hands still entwined. The next few months passed in a haze of happiness Flora had not known was possible. James courted her the old-fashioned way, with respect and care. He brought her wildflowers from the pastures. He taught her to ride properly, his hand steadying her in the saddle. They read Shakespeare together in the evenings, taking different parts and making Carlos laugh with their dramatic renditions. James asked her opinion on ranch decisions, and listened when she made suggestions about improving the garden or organizing the supplies. On Christmas Eve, it snowed. Rare for this part of Texas, but the flakes fell soft and white over the ranch. Flora stood on the porch watching it come down, and James came to stand beside her. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. Flora unwrapped it to find a beautiful silver locket. When she opened it, there was a tiny photograph inside of her with James and Carlos, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Shafter the month before. "So you always remember that you have family," James said quietly. "We are your family now if you want us to be." Flora threw her arms around his neck. James caught her, holding her close. "I love you," she whispered against his shoulder. "I think I have loved you since you took those shackles off my wrists." James pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. "I love you too. Have since the moment you looked at those mountains instead of showing fear to those men at the auction. You were the bravest thing I had ever seen." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Flora felt like she was finally, truly home. In February of 1879, James proposed properly, down on one knee in the parlor with Carlos and Sheriff Davis and his wife as witnesses. Flora said yes before he even finished asking the question. They were married in March at the little church in Shafter, with half the town attending. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears, and the sheriff gave Flora away since she had no father to do it. Flora wore a white dress she and Mrs. Davis had sewn together, and James wore a new suit that made him look even more handsome than usual. When the preacher said they could kiss, James dipped her dramatically, and the whole church erupted in applause and laughter. The ranch house became their true home. Flora planted roses by the porch, and James built her a greenhouse so she could garden year-round. They worked side by side every day, building their life and their herd. Carlos became like an uncle to them both, always around with a joke or a helping hand. In the spring of 1880, Flora told James she was expecting a baby. He spun her around in his arms, careful even in his joy not to jostle her too much. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. Their son was born in November, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Thomas Henry Harrison after both their fathers. James cried when he held his son for the first time, this tough cowboy who broke wild horses and drove cattle through storms. "I will protect you both with everything I have," he promised, looking between Flora and the baby. "You are my whole world." Life was not always easy. There were droughts and difficult cattle drives, years when money was tight and they had to make hard decisions. But they faced everything together. Flora proved to have a mind for business, and she helped James expand the ranch to be one of the most successful in the region. They treated their workers fairly and earned a reputation for integrity. In 1882, Flora gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Ruth. James was outnumbered now, he joked, but he loved every minute of being a father to 3 children. He taught Thomas to ride and rope, and he taught the girls the same skills, much to the shock of some of the more traditional townspeople. "My daughters will be able to take care of themselves," James said firmly when Mrs. Chen suggested the girls should focus on more ladylike pursuits. "Just like their mother can." The years passed in a blur of happiness. Thomas grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament and his mother in book learning. Sarah was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and racing horses. Ruth was gentle and artistic, drawing everything she saw. The ranch prospered, and James and Flora became pillars of the Shafter community. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Flora back to the spot where he had first brought her to the ranch. They stood looking at the house, now expanded and painted white with green shutters. The barn had been rebuilt bigger. The gardens were lush. Cattle grazed contentedly across rolling pastures. "You remember what I was thinking that day I brought you here?" James asked, his arm around her waist. "Tell me." "I was thinking that you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I was terrified you would leave as soon as you realized you could. I was already half in love with you, and I had only known you a few hours." Flora leaned into him. "Do you remember what I was thinking?" "What?" "I was thinking that this cowboy had the kindest eyes I had ever seen, and maybe, just maybe, my life was not over. Maybe it was just beginning." "It was," James said, "for both of us." They stood together watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, their children's laughter drifting from the house, the ranch they had built together spreading out around them. Flora thought about that terrified girl on the auction block, and then about the woman she had become. Free, loved, respected, happy. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible. For giving me freedom when I had none. For loving me when I did not think I could be loved." James turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders, the same hands that had unlocked her shackles all those years ago. "Flora Harrison, you have always been worth loving. I just got lucky enough to be the one you chose to love back." He kissed her there in the fading light, and Flora knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every moment of fear, every tear she had shed had been worth it to arrive at this moment. She was home. She was free. She was loved. The ranch continued to thrive over the years. Carlos eventually retired, but stayed in a small house James built for him on the property, claiming he was too old to go anywhere else, and besides, someone needed to keep an eye on them all. Thomas took over more of the ranch operations as he grew into a young man, showing the same patience with animals and good business sense as his father. Sarah married a young doctor who had moved to Shafter and opened a practice, but she still came out to the ranch to ride whenever she could. Ruth became a teacher at the local school, inspiring young minds just as her mother had once dreamed of doing. Flora started a small school on the ranch property, teaching children from surrounding farms and ranches who could not make it to town for proper schooling. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, giving these children the same gift of education her parents had given her. James supported this endeavor completely, even building a proper one-room schoolhouse near their home. One evening in the summer of 1895, when their hair was starting to gray and their children were grown with lives of their own, James and Flora sat on the porch as they had done 1,000 times before. Grandchildren were sleeping inside, Thomas's children visiting for the week. "Do you ever think about that day?" Flora asked. "The auction." "Sometimes," James admitted, "but not with sadness. That day brought you to me. That day you gave me everything. My life, my freedom, my future. No, my love. James took her hand, his thumb rubbing across her wedding ring. "I just removed the chains. You gave yourself everything that came after. Your strength, your courage, your capacity to love and trust again after what you had been through. That was all you." Flora thought about this. "We gave each other everything then. How about that?" "That sounds about right." James smiled, the same smile that had made her heart skip a beat 17 years ago. "Do you know what the best part of my life is?" "What?" "This. Right here. Sitting with you, watching the sunset, knowing that tomorrow we get to do it all over again. Knowing that we built something real and lasting. Not just the ranch, but this family, this love." He gestured to encompass everything around them. "You turned my house into a home, Flora. You turned my life into something worth living." "You saved me," Flora said, tears pricking her eyes even after all these years. "We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared. From inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing and playing. The ranch that had started with just James and Carlos, and a dream now employed a dozen ranch hands and supported multiple families. The brand they had created together, a combined H and Z intertwined, was respected throughout Texas. But more than any material success, Flora treasured the life they had built on foundation of respect and love. James had shown her what it meant to be truly valued, to be seen as a complete person with thoughts and dreams and worth beyond what she could provide to someone else. And she had shown him what it meant to be loved not for his protection or his provision, but simply for who he was as a man, a partner, a father, a friend. "James," Flora said as the stars grew brighter overhead. "Yes, love. If I had to live my whole life over again, every painful moment, every loss, every hardship, I would do it all exactly the same just to end up here with you." James pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me." "And you once compared me to Romeo," Flora laughed. "Romeo was an impulsive child. You are so much better. Just better, not devastatingly handsome and heroic. You are fishing for compliments, old man. Old, I will show you old." James stood and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around the porch in an impromptu dance. Flora laughed, letting him twirl her under the stars. They were older now, their bodies not as quick as they once were, but the joy between them was as fresh and real as it had been when they were young. When they finally stopped, both slightly breathless, James cupped Flora's face in his hands. "I love you, Flora Harrison. My brave, brilliant, beautiful wife. Thank you for choosing me. I love you too. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose." They stood there wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something extraordinary. The night breeze rustled through the cottonwood trees James had planted when they first married, now grown tall and strong. An owl hooted in the distance. Inside, one of the grandchildren called out in their sleep, and they heard Thomas's low voice soothing them back to rest. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the love they had cultivated and shared, spreading out in ripples to touch everyone around them. The ranch hands who worked for them knew they would be treated fairly. The children Flora taught knew they were valued and capable. Their own children had grown up seeing what a real partnership looked like, built on mutual respect and affection. As they finally headed inside for the night, James paused in the doorway and looked back at the ranch spread out under the stars. Flora stopped beside him, following his gaze. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking about that scared young man who bought this land, wondering if he would be able to make something of himself out here. I am thinking how empty this house felt before you came. And I am thinking how grateful I am that I was in Shafter that particular day, that I heard about that auction, that I had enough money to make that bid. He looked down at her. I am thinking that buying your freedom was not just the best money I ever spent. It was the best decision I ever made, because it brought you into my life. It was the best decision I ever made too, Flora said, choosing to stay, choosing to trust you, choosing to love you. Even though I was terrified, even though I had every reason to be suspicious, something in me knew you were different, that you were safe, that you were home. They went inside together, checking on their grandchildren, banking the fire, preparing for bed just as they had done thousands of times before. But before they slept, James pulled Flora close and whispered, "Thank you for staying." And Flora whispered back, "Thank you for giving me something worth staying for." The next morning, they woke to another beautiful Texas day. Flora made breakfast while James and Thomas headed out to check the cattle. The grandchildren tumbled out of bed demanding stories and pancakes. Ruth arrived with her husband to drop off more children for the day, and Sarah stopped by with her doctor husband to check on Carlos, who had a cough that would not quit. It was chaos and noise, and exactly the kind of life Flora had dreamed of during those dark days after her father's death, when she thought she had no future. James caught her eye across the crowded kitchen and winked, and Flora felt that familiar flutter in her chest that his attention always caused. Years continued to roll by in the way they do, marked by seasons and celebrations, losses and victories. Carlos passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, and they buried him on the ranch he had helped build, under a cottonwood tree he had particularly loved. James grieved his old friend deeply, but took comfort in knowing Carlos had died happy and surrounded by people who loved him. Thomas married a clever young woman named Elizabeth, who took to ranch life like she was born for it. She and Flora became close friends as well as daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. Sarah had 2 more children, both girls who inherited their mother's wild spirit. Ruth's students adored her, and she eventually became the principal of Shafter's school. As the new century approached, the ranch stood as a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together with love and respect as their foundation. James was in his late 40s now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, but he was still strong and vital, still breaking horses and driving cattle, still making Flora laugh with his dry wit and tender observations. Flora, in her early 40s, had gained a reputation throughout the region as a woman of wisdom and compassion. People sought her counsel on everything from education to marriage to business. She had published several articles in agricultural journals about sustainable ranching practices, and she served on the school board in Shafter, pushing for better resources for all children regardless of their family's financial situation. On a warm spring evening in 1899, the entire family gathered at the ranch to celebrate James and Flora's 20th wedding anniversary. 3 generations filled the house and spilled out onto the grounds. Thomas and Elizabeth's 4 children ran wild with Sarah's children and Ruth's young daughter. Friends from town had come out, bringing food and gifts and laughter. As the celebration wound down and the sun began to set, Flora found herself standing in the same spot where James had first shown her the ranch 2 decades earlier. James came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist in a gesture so familiar and comfortable it felt like breathing. 20 years, Flora marveled. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. 20 years of waking up next to you, James said. 20 years of your laugh, your wisdom, your love. Best 20 years of my life, and I hope we have 20 more. At least, Flora agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Do you remember that first night I stayed here, how terrified I was? I remember thinking I would do anything to make you feel safe, to make you smile. I was already lost to you." James kissed the top of her head. "You owned my heart from that first moment, Flora. You still do." Their children came to join them, Thomas with his arm around Elizabeth, Sarah with her doctor husband Robert, Ruth with her schoolteacher husband Daniel. The grandchildren played in the grass nearby, catching fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Mother, Father," Thomas said, raising a glass. "To the best parents anyone could ask for, you taught us what love looks like in action, what partnership really means, what it means to build a life based on respect and kindness." He looked at his sisters, who nodded in agreement. "We are who we are because of your example." Sarah added, "You showed me I did not have to choose between being a wife and mother and being my own person, that the right partner supports all of who you are." Ruth spoke softly. "You demonstrated that education and compassion matter, that how we treat people, especially those most vulnerable, defines who we are." Flora felt tears sliding down her cheeks. James squeezed her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You three are our greatest achievement," Flora said. "The ranch, the business, everything else pales in comparison to the people you have become." The family stayed together late into the night, sharing stories and memories. The grandchildren eventually fell asleep in various spots around the house, and the adults talked quietly on the porch, the way families do when they are completely comfortable with each other. When everyone finally left or went to bed, James and Flora were alone again under the stars. Just the two of them, like it had been so many nights before. "Flora Harrison," James said formally, "may I have this dance?" There was no music, but Flora stepped into his arms anyway. They swayed together in the starlight, moving to a rhythm only they could hear. The same rhythm that had been beating between them since that day in the Shafter town square when a cowboy placed a winning bid and immediately set a woman free, never imagining he was also freeing his own heart to love. "Always," Flora whispered. "You can always have this dance. Today, tomorrow, forever. You gave me freedom, James, but I freely chose to give you my heart, and I would make that choice every single day for the rest of my life." James held her tighter. "Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. Being loved by you is the greatest honor of my life." They danced until the moon rose high and bright. Two people who had beaten impossible odds to find each other and build something beautiful. The ranch would continue for generations, passing from Thomas to his children and beyond. The Harrison name would become synonymous with integrity and fair dealing throughout Texas. But more importantly, the legacy of love that James and Flora built would echo through their descendants, teaching each new generation what it meant to see another person truly, to value them fully, to love them completely. As they finally headed to bed that night, Flora took one last look at the land they had built together. The house where they had raised their children, the barn where James had taught her to ride, the garden she had planted and nurtured, the pastures where their cattle grazed. It was all theirs, built from nothing with hard work and determination and unwavering partnership. But the real treasure was not the land or the buildings or the bank accounts. It was the hand holding hers, the man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to offer freedom instead of control, respect instead of ownership, love instead of possession. It was the life they had crafted together, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Flora Zimmerman had stood on an auction block thinking her life was over. Flora Harrison stood in the home she had made with the man she loved, surrounded by the family they had created, and knew her life had truly begun that day. The day a cowboy won a bid and gave her the greatest gift imaginable, the freedom to choose her own future. And she had chosen him, over and over again, every day for 20 years. She chose him still. She would choose him always. "I love you," she whispered as they lay down together. "I love you," James whispered back. "My Flora, my freedom fighter, my heart." And under the vast Texas sky, on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their love and labor, James and Flora Harrison drifted off to sleep, together as they had been for 20 years. Together as they would be for all the years to come. Free, loved, and finally, completely home.